A golden blur crawled through the rain that morning, small and bleeding, dragging a bag that no one dared touch. Within hours, that trembling creature would rewrite the past of a man who thought his battles were buried and expose a truth that had been buried even deeper. If stories of courage and loyalty move you, like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. At sunrise, the glass doors of Everton Veterans Hospital opened, and a frail golden puppy limped in. Its fur was crusted with mud and dried blood, one paw torn raw from miles of gravel. It looked too young to have known pain like that, yet its eyes, wide and glassy, held something more than fear. They held purpose. Clenched tightly in its tiny jaws was a leather bag, heavy enough to drag across the polished floor with a faint metallic scrape. The morning light flickered off the brass buckle like a silent alarm. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A nurse dropped her clipboard. For a long second, no one moved. Then the dog whimpered, staggered another step, and collapsed just beyond the reception desk. The metallic clink from inside the bag echoed through the lobby, turning curiosity into dread. Dr. Everett Lang, a retired combat medic who had seen more blood than sunlight during his years of service, looked up from the coffee kiosk. His hands, once steady enough to stitch arteries in a desert tent, trembled slightly as he set his mug down. He was 71, built from bone and resolve, walking with a steel cane and a limp that told more stories than his medals ever could. The lines around his eyes spoke of wars survived but never escaped. He had come to the hospital that morning not as a doctor, but as a patient, another veteran keeping routine checkups alive to feel some sense of order. But when the small, golden shape caught his eye, something inside him straightened. The puppy twitched, trying to rise, but its strength gave out. It made a sound halfway between a bark and a cry. Everett's heart kicked hard. He pushed through the startled crowd, cane tapping with soft authority, and knelt beside the trembling animal. "Easy there, sweetheart," he murmured, voice gravelly but kind. The dog's sides heaved. Its ribs lifted against his palm, each breath shallow. He reached to remove the bag, but the dog's jaw tightened. A low growl bubbled from its throat, not hostile, just protective. Everett froze his medic's instinct, whispering what every good soldier knows: you never take what someone's dying to protect. The head nurse, Adeline Poe, hovered behind him, biting her lip. "Should we call animal control?" she asked. Everett shook his head without looking up. "Not yet." He brushed mud from the dog's neck and found no collar, no tag. "You didn't wander in by accident, did you?" he murmured. The puppy blinked, then gave a weak whine, glancing toward the corridor on the right, the east wing. The part of the hospital was closed off for renovation. Everett noticed the motion and frowned. "You want me to go there?" he asked softly. The dog's tail gave one faint, uncertain flick. Behind him, two veterans waiting in the lobby exchanged glances. One said quietly, "That pup's seen combat." Everett managed a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah," he replied. "So have I." The humor faded as quickly as it came. The dog shuddered, coughed weakly, and struggled to its feet again. Every step it took smeared a faint line of red across the tile, yet it refused to drop the bag. The sound that followed a faint clink of metal from within sent a cold spark through Everett's spine. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong to random objects, precise, intentional, like instruments in a medic's field kit. When the security guard, a broad man named Reggie Ward, stepped forward, Everett lifted his cane slightly. "Hold back," he said. "This one's trying to tell us something." The puppy staggered 3 more steps, looked back once, and whimpered. The sound carried an ache Everett hadn't felt since his last rescue mission overseas, the tone of something small trying to lead something larger toward salvation. Reggie frowned. "Doc, it's bleeding. Whatever's in that bag could be dangerous." Everett didn't answer. Instead, he knelt again, his old knees protesting, and whispered to the pup, "Show me where, soldier." The dog's ears flicked at the word. It turned slowly, dragging the bag, heading again toward the east corridor. The automatic lights flicked on as it passed, illuminating a faint trail of paw prints, thin and red. Everett followed. The hallway felt colder the deeper they went. Halfway down, Everett caught a flicker of movement outside the glass wall, a figure standing by the parking lot watching. His pulse jumped. "Adeline," he called softly. "Lock that front door." She hesitated. "What is it?" He didn't answer, just fixed his eyes on the shadow. When he turned back, the puppy had stopped beside the emergency stairwell, panting hard. The bag hung from its jaw, swinging slightly. Its eyes met his again, pleading and determined all at once. Everett leaned his cane against the wall and reached out slowly. "It's okay," he said. "You've done your part." The dog lowered the bag, but didn't let go. Instead, it rested its paw on top of it, as if protecting something sacred. Everett could see now that the strap was old military leather, marked with faded initials. His breath caught. His own initials. He froze. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. The puppy's ears flattened. It gave a faint, broken bark. A nurse gasped behind him. Everett's mind raced backward through decades of sand noise and loss back to the medic bag he'd left behind after a chopper crash in 1989, the one he'd never seen again. It had vanished with his last field unit. Yet here it was, half a lifetime later, dragged into his hospital by a half-dead dog. The metallic clink inside made sense now. Vials, clamps, the instruments he once used to save men whose names he could still recite by heart. But why now? Why this way? He touched the bag's edge, trembling. The dog didn't resist this time. It looked at him one last time, eyes glassy with exhaustion, and then collapsed, fully its small body quivering once before going still. Everett's throat closed. He checked for a pulse, faint but present. He pressed his hand to the pup's side. "Hang on, soldier," he whispered, his voice breaking. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of tears. Around him, the hospital had fallen silent again. Outside, the watching figure by the lot turned and walked away. Inside, Dr. Everett. Lang lifted the bag to his chest, the weight of it both familiar and unbearable, and whispered to the unconscious dog, "You made it home." Everett sat beside it, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the bag. His initials still stared back at him, burned into the cracked leather. He traced them slowly with one trembling finger and whispered, "You carried this farther than any man I've ever known." The puppy stirred, lifting its head weakly. For a moment, its eyes met his dark, lucid, too knowing. It wasn't random. Everett could feel it in his bones, the same sixth sense that had once saved him when radios failed and orders got lost in sandstorms. Something about that dog and that bag was meant for him. The hospital halls beyond his door were silent, except for the hum of the HVAC and the distant squeak of rubber soles. He leaned back, replaying every detail, the limp, the direction it faced, the glance towards the east wing, and that shadow outside watching. He'd seen that posture before, the stillness of someone waiting for a signal. He had felt it in the war, whenever the silence grew too thick before gunfire. It wasn't paranoia now. It was instinct, the kind that never retired no matter how many years passed. At dawn, when the first pink light leaked through the blinds, Everett rose and went to check on the pup again. She was awake, trying to push herself up, trembling but determined. "You stubborn little thing," he said quietly. "I'd call you Private if you were human." The dog blinked slowly, and for reasons he couldn't explain, the name stuck. "Private it is," he murmured. Private wagged her tail, once weak but certain. Everett smiled faintly, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. He was thinking about Millhaven Creek, the name from the note he'd glimpsed when he first opened the bag. He hadn't told anyone about it yet. Something told him not to, not until he knew what was really happening. After breakfast, he carried the bag down to radiology, where an old friend doctor, Callum Reese, was finishing a shift. Reese had served 2 tours with Everett back in the day. When Everett dropped the medic bag on the counter, Reese frowned. "Where'd you dig that up?" he asked. Everett's jaw tightened. A dog brought it in. Reese laughed once, then stopped when he saw the look in Everett's eyes. "You're serious?" Everett nodded. "Came into the lobby yesterday. Nearly bled out. This was in its mouth." Reese unzipped the bag carefully, revealing the rows of instruments, the vials, the folded note. He lifted it with a latex-gloved hand and squinted at the faded handwriting. "This paper's fresh," he said slowly. "Hours old, not decades." Everett's pulse jumped. What Reese pointed to the ink, still glossy. "Whoever wrote this is alive, or was when that dog set out." The words hit Everett like a shot. He felt the ground tilt beneath him. He'd thought the bag was some ghost from his past, a remnant carried by coincidence. But now it was something else, an active message, a distress call from someone out there. "Millhaven Creek's a 6-mile stretch through old logging country," Reese continued. "Barely any signal, no houses for miles. You think someone's hurt out there?" Everett glanced toward the window. Outside, the day had turned gray wind, pushing against the trees. "Someone was desperate enough to trust a half-starved dog to find me," he said. "So yes, someone's hurt." Private gave a soft whine from the corner, as if echoing his thought. Reese hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "You sure you're up for this? Ev, you're not exactly 20 anymore." Everett gave a thin smile. "Neither's my conscience." He gathered the bag, adjusted the strap across his shoulder, and turned to go. But before he reached the door, Reese caught his sleeve. "Hold up," he said. "If this is tied to what you think, you might not be the only one looking for whoever wrote that note. That shadow you mentioned, I checked the camera feed. There was someone there last night." He circled the lot twice. Everett froze, and Reese's expression hardened. Military walk, broad shoulders, nose surveillance blind spots. Whoever he is, he's trained. A cold heaviness settled in Everett's stomach. It all lined up: the dog's guarded behavior, the deliberate direction, the stranger outside. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a chain of signals, and somehow he was back in the middle of it. He returned to the small recovery room where Private lay. She wagged her tail when she saw him, though her paw was wrapped in gauze. "You're not staying behind, are you?" he asked softly. The dog lifted her head as if to say no. Everett sighed. "Fine. We do it my way. Slow and quiet." He tucked a small water dish, some gauze, and a flashlight into the bag, then glanced at her. "Let's see what we're really dealing with." By noon, he'd checked out of the ward, told Adeline he was heading home early, and loaded Private into his old truck. The rain had started to fall in cold needles, turning the windshield into a gray sheet. As the hospital disappeared behind them, Private sat upright, despite her injuries, staring straight ahead. She seemed to know the direction better than he did. The road to Millhaven Creek wound through old forest, the kind that swallowed sound. After 20 minutes, the cell signal dropped. Everett slowed, scanning the shoulder. "You'll tell me when we're close, won't you?" he asked. Private let out a single low bark. It wasn't playful. It was confirmation. They reached the old bridge near the logging trail and stopped. The water below roared, swollen from rain. Everett stepped out, boots sinking into mud, and looked around. Yet the unease wouldn't leave him. It was the same tension that used to creep up his spine before an ambush, the same electric awareness that something unseen was closing in. When they reached the base of the trail leading toward Millhaven Creek, the puppy whimpered once. Everett parked the truck beside an old wooden sign nearly swallowed by moss. The air outside was sharp, smelling of wet pine and decay. He stepped out, gripping his cane in one hand and the medic bag in the other. Private followed, limping through the mud, refusing to stay behind despite her pain. "You should be resting," he muttered. She only looked up at him with those same unrelenting eyes, as if to say there was no time for comfort. He sighed and began walking. The forest floor sucked at his boots, and fog twisted between the trees like breath from invisible mouths. Every sound seemed amplified: the drip of rain, the creak of branches, the faint hiss of water rushing somewhere ahead. After half an hour, the trail narrowed, and Everett noticed something strange: impressions in the mud boot prints, heavier and deeper than his own, leading the same way they were going. He crouched to study them, pressing his hand against the edge. "Recent," he whispered. Private sniffed at the ground, then growled softly, her fur bristling despite the rain. Everett straightened, scanning the shadows. The forest answered only with silence. They continued slower now. The prints veered off the trail and disappeared into thicker brush toward the direction of the creek. Everett followed cautiously. The sound of the rushing water grew louder, and the slope dipped steeply ahead. Then from somewhere behind them, a twig snapped. Everett froze, pulse thudding in his ears. He turned slowly, cane raised, scanning the fog. Nothing moved. But Private had gone rigid, staring into the distance, lips curled just enough to show her small teeth. Another sound, a rustle faint but deliberate. Someone was out there. Everett stepped back until his shoulder brushed the rough bark of a tree. "Stay close," he murmured. The puppy obeyed, pressing against his boot. His training kicked in automatically. Scan, listen, breathe. Through the drizzle, he caught a glimpse of movement, a silhouette, human-sized, shifting between the trunks 30 yards back. He blinked, and it was gone. "We're being watched," he muttered. He reached into the bag and retrieved the flashlight covering most of its beam with his hand as he flicked it on. A thin arc of light cut through the mist. Nothing. Just trees and fog. Still, the feeling persisted, predator patience, someone trailing them at a distance. Everett turned back towards the creek. "We move," he said quietly. Private whimpered once, but followed. They pushed through the underbrush until they reached the bank where the swollen water roared against jagged rocks. The rain had eased to a cold drizzle, and steam rose from the creek in faint curls. Everett scanned the area for signs of life. At first, there was nothing, just driftwood and broken branches. Then Private barked, once startling him. She limped toward a cluster of bushes near the water's edge, pawing frantically. Everett hurried over and knelt beside her. Beneath the tangle of wet leaves, he found something glinting faintly metal. He brushed away the debris and revealed a piece of twisted car frame, small but unmistakable. "Good girl," he said, breath-catching. He looked around, following the direction the debris had come from. Upstream through the trees, he saw another flash of silver and realized what it was, a shattered vehicle, half submerged on the opposite bank. "That's our crash," he whispered. Private barked again, louder this time. But before he could move, a voice echoed from behind them, low, commanding. "Step away from the dog, Doctor." Everett spun, flashlight swinging. Through the fog emerged a tall man in a dark rain jacket, water dripping from the brim of his cap. His stance was rigid military. In his hand he held something small and metallic, a pistol not raised, but visible enough to make its message clear. Private growled, baring her teeth despite her trembling. Everett tightened his grip on the cane, keeping his expression calm. "You lost friend?" he asked evenly. The man shook his head slowly. "You shouldn't be here. Turn around and forget what you saw." Everett's voice stayed steady. "Someone's hurt out there. You expect me to walk away from that?" The stranger's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what's at stake." Everett tilted his head slightly. "Try me." For a heartbeat, the forest held its breath. Then Private barked, sharp and defiant, breaking the silence. The man flinched just slightly, his eyes flicking toward her, and that was enough. Everett moved. He swung the flashlight, striking the man's wrist with surprising speed. The gun fell into the mud. Private lunged forward, biting the stranger's pant leg, snarling with the fury of a cornered soldier. Everett kicked the weapon down the slope into the creek, then grabbed the dog by her scruff. "Enough," he said, pulling her back. The man stumbled but didn't retaliate. He wiped rain from his eyes, breathing hard. "You don't know what you've started." He spat, backing away into the fog. Within seconds he was gone, his footsteps swallowed by the storm. Everett stood still, panting. He looked down at Private. Her sides heaved, her fur plastered with mud, but her eyes were fierce, alive with purpose. Private limped beside him, her paw bleeding again, yet her eyes were locked forward, unwavering. Ahead through the mist lay the outline of a crushed sedan, half hidden under a fallen pine tree. The hood was bent like paper, and steam still rose faintly from what remained of the engine. Everett stopped at the edge of the wreck, heart thudding in his chest. "We found it," he said quietly. Private gave a soft whine, nudging the medic bag at his side, as if reminding him of what had brought them there. Everett crouched beside the driver's side door, using the butt of his cane to scrape away mud from the window. Inside, a woman sat slumped forward unconscious but breathing shallowly, her face pale against the airbag. In the back seat, a small boy was strapped into a car seat, his chest rising and falling too quickly. A plastic insulin pump hung uselessly from his arm. Everett's pulse surged. The note, the insulin vials, the desperate message, it all connected now. He pulled open the rear door. With a grunt, hinges screeching, and checked the boy's pulse. Weak, thready, fading fast. "Hang in there, little one," he whispered. Private whimpered beside him, pressing close to the child's side. Everett reached into the medic bag, hands steady despite the storm pounding through his chest. The same instruments he had used decades ago gleamed under the dim light filtering through the trees. He prepped a syringe, drew the insulin, and injected it carefully, whispering words of comfort to a child too deep in shock to hear. The boy's breathing steadied slightly. "That's it," Everett murmured. "Just keep fighting." He turned his attention to the woman next, checking for injuries. Her pulse was faint but present. She'd suffered a concussion, maybe internal bleeding, but she was alive. He reached for his radio to call for help and realized with a curse that there was no signal. The forest swallowed sound and signal both. He looked down at Private, who was watching him intently, tail barely twitching. "We'll need to get them out," he said. "You stay close." He began gathering what he could, bandages, gauze, a small oxygen mask from the emergency kit. The bag seemed to know what he needed before he did each item exactly where memory told him it should be. It was uncanny, almost like the bag itself was guiding him, not the other way around. He thought about the man in the woods, the one who had ordered him to leave, and the chill in his gut deepened. This wasn't a simple accident. The woman hadn't just crashed, someone wanted her found too late. As he worked, Private suddenly growled low and warning. Everett froze his hand halfway to the first aid kit. He looked up sharply and saw movement again beyond the wreck shadows, shifting where no wind moved. "Not again," he muttered. He grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. Nothing. Just mist curling like smoke. But Private's growl deepened, fur standing on end. Everett's instincts roared back to life. He drew closer to the car, positioning himself between the wreck and the forest. "You'll have to go through me this time," he whispered under his breath. Then from the direction of the creek came the faint crunch of boots. One set deliberate, unhurried. Whoever it was didn't care about being quiet anymore. Everett's heart hammered as he reached into the bag again, not for medicine, but for the old surgical scissors that could double as a blade if needed. The shape coming through the fog was the same man from before, but now he carried a flashlight and moved with the confidence of someone who knew the land. "You should have walked away, Doctor," he said, voice calm but dripping with threat. Everett's jaw clenched. "And leave a mother and child to die, not my style." The man sighed as if disappointed. "You don't understand what's in that bag. That woman was supposed to disappear quietly. You're interfering with something far bigger than you." Everett's grip tightened on the scissors. "Bigger than saving lives." The stranger stepped closer, and Private barked the sound, fierce despite her small frame. The man's gaze flicked to her, his lips curling slightly. That mutt should have drowned hours ago. That was his mistake. Everett lunged, driving his cane into the man's chest and knocking him backward into the mud. The gun in his hand went flying, clattering against a rock. Private leapt forward, teeth sinking into the man's sleeve, holding him down. Everett grabbed the gun first, checked the chamber, and aimed it steady. "You picked the wrong hospital," he said quietly. The man stilled, face pale, under the gray light. "You think you can protect them? You have no idea who I work for." Everett's voice hardened. "Then pray they never find out you failed." He motioned for the man to stay down. "Move again and you'll be breathing through a hole I make myself." Private released her grip, stepping back, but still snarling softly. Everett kicked the gun deeper into the mud and turned his attention back to the wreck. The woman had begun to stir, eyes fluttering weakly open. "Ma'am, don't move," Everett said gently. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." She blinked, disoriented, whispering something he couldn't make out. He leaned closer and caught 2 words, "My son." "He's alive," Everett said firmly. "He's going to be okay." Tears welled in her eyes before she passed out again. Everett wrapped her head wound, checked her breathing, and covered her with his coat. "Private," he said softly. "Watch them." The puppy sat beside the mother's hand, pressing her paw against it. Everett dragged the unconscious man closer to a tree and tied his hands with a strip of cloth torn from the car seat. He wasn't sure how long the restraint would hold, but it was enough to buy time. Then he turned back to the medic bag. Inside, something else caught his eye. A folded letter tucked beneath the lining. He pulled it out, unfolded it carefully, and frowned at the header. The paper bore the seal of the Department of Defense. The words were typed, not handwritten. "Operation Nightglass, asset extraction terminated." His blood ran cold. He glanced towards the tied man. "What the hell are you part of?" The man smirked faintly, despite the mud caked on his face. Behind them, the bound man groaned faintly, where Everett had left him tied to the tree. Everett didn't look back. He didn't trust that rope to hold forever, and the words the man had spoken still echoed in his head. "Operation Nightglass asset extraction terminated." The phrase gnawed at him like an infection. Military covert erased. He'd spent decades trying to bury the ghosts of old missions, and now one had clawed its way back through a dying woman's car wreck and a wounded dog that refused to quit. The mother stirred faintly on the stretcher he'd fashioned from broken branches and seatbelts. He'd wrapped her in his coat to stave off the chill, but her breathing had grown shallow again. Every few minutes he checked the boy's pulse and whispered the same steady rhythm of words he'd used on battlefields long ago. "Stay with me, son. Don't let go." Private stayed close ears, twitching with every distant sound. Once, she froze, head lifting sharply, growling toward the direction they had come. Everett stopped and turned his head, listening. For a moment there was only the hiss of rain, then a faint crack of branches, deliberate and slow. His pulse quickened. "Keep moving," he muttered. They reached a clearing near the ridge where his truck was parked, the faint glint of the windshield just visible through the mist. Relief washed over him, but it lasted only seconds. A shape stood beside the vehicle. Not the man from before, taller, broader posture military. A second one stepped out from behind the truck, speaking into a radio. Everett ducked low behind a fallen log, pulling the stretcher gently down with him. Private crouched at his side, chest heaving. "Looks like your friend made a call," Everett whispered. The 2 men wore tactical rain gear, unmarked. They moved with precision, scanning the forest. Their voices carried just enough for Everett to catch fragments. No contact yet. Bag confirmed. Orders to retrieve." "Retrieve. Not rescue." He tightened his grip on the bag strap. Private's tail flicked once a warning. He looked down at her. "You up for one more fight?" The dog's eyes answered before her body did. She was exhausted, bleeding again through the bandage, but she rose to her feet, low and silent. Everett adjusted his position, watching, as one of the men circled toward the tree line. The other opened the truck door and began searching inside. Everett counted his breaths, 3 in 1, out, then moved. He stepped from cover, gun raised, the same weapon he'd taken earlier. "Step away from the truck," he commanded. The man spun, reaching for his sidearm, but Everett's voice cut sharper than the wind. "Don't do it." For a moment, both men froze their eyes, assessing him, weighing his stance. Then the one near the door smirked faintly. "You're making this worse, Doctor. Hand over the bag." Everett's hand didn't waver. "There's a child dying in this forest. That bag isn't your property anymore." The man's tone stayed calm. "You think you're saving lives. You're not. That mother's not who you think she is." Everett's jaw clenched. "Enlighten me. She's an informant," the man said, voice low. "You're protecting a traitor, carrying classified intel, meant to be erased. That's what Nightglass is, containment. You walk out with her alive and you drag half the country's ghosts into daylight. Rain dripped down Everett's brow. He kept the gun steady, but inside something cracked. If the man was telling the truth, he was standing between loyalty and morality, the two things that had torn every soldier apart since the beginning of time. "You expect me to believe that after you left her to die?" he asked. The man's expression didn't change. "Orders are orders. You know that better than anyone." Everett's voice dropped to a near growl. "I stopped taking orders 30 years ago." Then the man moved first. His partner shouted, raising his rifle. Everett fired a single shot, hitting the ground near the first man's boot. The echo shattered the fog birds exploding from the trees. Private lunged forward, snarling and snapping at the soldier's leg. The man stumbled, falling sideways, and Everett used the opening to grab the boy's stretcher and drag it toward the truck. The other soldier yelled into his radio, "Target's mobile, moving North Ridge." Everett climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. Private scrambled in beside him, paws slipping on the wet floorboard. "Hold on," Everett muttered. He turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. The first soldier recovered, raising his rifle. Bullets struck the side mirror glass, spraying across the dash. Everett gunned the accelerator tires spinning in mud before catching traction. The truck lurched forward, tearing through the clearing and onto the dirt road. Private barked fiercely, the sound echoing over the rain. Everett gritted his teeth, one hand steady on the wheel, the other keeping pressure on the bag beside him. The boy whimpered faintly from the back seat, a fragile sign of life that reminded him what was at stake. The headlights cut through the mist, revealing the narrow path ahead. "Hang on, kid," he whispered. Behind them, the shouts faded, but the pounding of engines followed soon after. In the rearview mirror, beams of light pierced through the trees, two dark SUVs barreling down the same road. Everett slammed the gear stick into third, the old truck shuddering under strain. "We can't outrun them long," he muttered. Private looked up at him, eyes bright, as if daring him to try. The road curved sharply around a ridge. Everett turned hard, the back wheels sliding dangerously close to the drop-off. Mud splattered across the windshield. The forest blurred by in streaks of green and gray. "You still with me, Private?" he asked through gritted teeth. The dog barked once, loud and sure. The road ahead forked one path down toward the valley, the other climbing into the high logging trails. He chose the high ground. "Always better to see what's chasing you," he muttered. The incline was brutal, the truck fishtailing on wet gravel. The engines behind drew closer. He glanced in the mirror and saw muzzle flash as a spray of light in the rain. Bullets cracked through the rear panel. Private yelped, crouching low, but Everett reached over instinctively, his hand brushing her trembling back. "You're okay, stay down." A spark of rage burned through the fear. He wasn't going to let her suffer again. The road narrowed, trees closing in on both sides. Then, through the storm, he spotted Salvation, the old ranger station ahead, a wooden structure, half collapsed, but with stone walls still standing. He turned sharply off the road headlights, off tires bumping over roots. The truck screeched to a halt behind the building. The pursuers roared past moments later, their lights cutting through the rain before vanishing down the main road. Everett waited until the sound faded before exhaling. "We bought some time," he said. He climbed out, breathing heavily, and checked on the boy. The child's pulse was stronger now, but he was feverish, skin clammy. Private limped toward the shelter, sniffing the doorway before curling inside. Everett followed, dragging the medic bag with him. Inside the station, the air smelled of wet ash and rot, but it was dry enough. He laid the boy near the fireplace and covered him with his jacket. The mother remained unconscious on the stretcher, pale as paper. He crouched beside her and whispered, "Who are you really?" Her eyelids fluttered. The mother, still unconscious, rested on the stretcher under a blanket of torn coats, and the boy slept in the corner beside the medic bag. The only sounds were the crackle of embers and the distant groan of trees swaying in the storm. Everett's mind wouldn't rest. He replayed every word the soldiers had said at the truck, every glimpse of that letter, marked with the seal of the Department of Defense. Operation Nightglass Asset Extraction terminated. The phrase refused to fade. Whoever those men were, they hadn't been improvising. They had orders. They were trained. And if they wanted this woman silenced, they'd be back by dawn. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion burning behind them. He'd thought the war was behind him. But war had a way of finding men like him. It didn't care about medals or years. It only cared about unfinished business. Private stirred suddenly, ears twitching. A low rumble escaped her throat. Everett tensed. "What is it?" he whispered. She lifted her head, nose pointing toward the forest beyond the door. The faint crunch of footsteps carried over the wind, too slow and deliberate to be wildlife. He reached for his cane and the pistol simultaneously. "They found us," he murmured. He crouched by the boy, tucking the blanket tighter around him, then placed the medic bag against his chest. "You guard that with your life, son." The boy stirred faintly, but didn't wake. Everett turned to Private. "You know what to do?" She limped toward the door, fur bristling, tail stiff. The sound outside grew louder. Multiple sets of boots now circling, closing in. Everett's breath steadied the way it used to before firefights. He took position behind the doorframe, heart pounding in rhythm with the rain that started up again. A flashlight beam sliced through the cracks in the wall, sweeping slowly across the room. Then a voice called out from the dark. "Lang, we know you're in there. You've got something that belongs to us." The tone was smooth, practiced, not panicked. "Hand over the woman and the bag, and we'll let the boy live." Everett's stomach twisted. "They know about the kid," he whispered. He looked down at Private. Stay close to him no matter what. He stepped into the doorway, raising the pistol. "You got the wrong address," he called out. The voice came back closer now. "You think you can outlast us, old man? This isn't your war anymore." Everett's reply came without hesitation. "Every war becomes mine when you start aiming at the innocent." Silence followed. Then a gunshot shattered the doorframe inches from his face, wood splintering across his arm. He dove behind the wall, returning fire once, twice. The echoes roared through the forest. Private barked furiously, a sound that sliced through the chaos. The boy whimpered in his sleep, startled by the noise. Everett crawled to him, pulling the blanket higher, shielding him with his body. Another bullet punched through the window. He counted the shots, 3, 4, then quiet. They were testing positions, finding angles. He needed to move. He looked toward the back wall, where an old maintenance hatch led to the storage tunnel half-collapsed years ago, but still open enough to crawl through. He whispered Private with me. The dog limped over immediately. Everett scooped up the boy, grabbed the medic bag, and slid them into the narrow tunnel. He followed on his elbows, pushing them forward. The confined space smelled of rust and old soil. Private squeezed in behind him, whining softly when her paw scraped stone. Everett gritted his teeth. Almost there. The tunnel exited 50 yards downslope behind a curtain of vines. They emerged into the cold night, gasping for air. Behind them, the sound of boots filled the cabin. Voices shouted commands. They'd found the stretcher. Everett crouched low, adjusting the boy in his arms. "We move now," he whispered. He sprinted down the incline, every step stabbing through his bad knee. Private ran beside him, stumbling but determined. Bullets cracked through the tree's dirt, exploding near their feet. He veered toward the creek, using the fog as cover. The roar of the current swallowed the gunfire for a moment. They reached the bank, breathless. Everett looked at the swollen water and cursed. It was wider now from the storm, fast and dark. "We can't cross," he muttered. Private barked once, then limped to a narrow fallen log spanning the river. "You're kidding," Everett said. The dog barked again, short and sure. "All right, soldier," he muttered. "Lead the way." Private went first claws, scraping the slick wood. Everett followed, one arm clutching the boy, the other gripping the medic bag. The log creaked beneath them. Halfway across, a shout came from behind, followed by the beam of flashlights. Then a gunshot. The wood splintered inches from Everett's boot. "Go, go," he shouted. Private scrambled forward, sliding but holding on. Everett reached the far side just as the log cracked and fell into the water, swept away in an instant. He stumbled onto the mud, collapsing for a moment as adrenaline flooded his veins. Private licked his arm once before collapsing beside him. He could hear shouting across the creek, but the men didn't dare fire now, too much distance, too little light. Everett staggered up. "We keep moving," he said more to himself than her. He followed the slope upward until they reached an old fire road that cut through the ridge. It was wider, drier, and clearer. The storm had broken above, and moonlight spilled through the gaps in the clouds. For a brief moment it illuminated the world in silver and shadow. Everett set the boy down, checking his breathing again. The child was stable, pulse-faint, but even. Private lay nearby, panting heavily. Her chest rose and fell too fast. Everett reached for the bag, finding another syringe, this one morphine, the smallest dose. "You earned this, soldier," he said softly, injecting it just under her skin. She relaxed instantly, tail twitching once before settling still. Everett sat beside her, pressing his palm to her fur. "You saved us again." He looked back down the trail, the forest alive with echoing voices. They'd cross soon. He didn't have long. He pulled the folded letter from his pocket and stared at the words. Again, Operation Nightglass Asset Extraction terminated. He turned the page over and found faint handwriting scrawled beneath the typed text words he hadn't noticed before. It read, "If you find this, follow the light where no stars live. They can't see past the dark." He frowned, whispering the phrase to himself. "Follow the light where no stars live." Private stirred slightly, ears flicking. Everett looked up at the ridgeline. In the distance through the mist, a faint red glow pulsed from the horizon, steady, rhythmic like a beacon. It wasn't lightning. It was deliberate. He felt a chill crawl down his spine. Every step up the muddy slope sent pain through his injured knee, but he ignored it. The forest had gone eerily silent, even the wind holding its breath. Behind him, faint shouts echoed from the other side of the creek, distant, but closing in. He didn't have much time. The beacon light ahead flickered from red to orange, cutting through the mist like a heartbeat. "You still with me, girl?" he asked. Private barked once, hoarse but steady. Everett's voice softened. "That's my soldier." The words came out with the same weary reverence he used to give his medics before every mission. The incline leveled briefly, opening into a clearing where the fog parted enough for him to see the source of the glow, a rusted military SUV, half sunken into the mud, its roof lights flashing faintly, powered by a dying battery. It looked like it had been there for days, maybe longer. The markings on the side were scratched off, but Everett recognized the frame immediately, a field extraction vehicle standard issue for covert recovery units. "So that's what you meant, huh?" he murmured, remembering the note. "Follow the light where no stars live." Private sniffed around the perimeter, ears twitching despite her fatigue. She whimpered once, then pawed at the mud near the rear tire. Everett crouched and began digging with his hands, mud cold and slick against his skin. After a few inches, his fingers hit metal. He wiped it clean, a license plate torn off another car. The numbers didn't match the wreck down by the creek. There were 2 vehicles, he said under his breath. 1 decoy. He pried the trunk open with his cane and froze. Inside lay a second medic bag, identical to his own, but newer. He opened it slowly and found the same equipment vials, gauze syringes, but these were labeled with tracking codes, each bearing the night glass emblem. Beneath them was a small sealed pouch, marked with a red tag reading, "Classified Return to Command." Everett's pulse surged. He took out his flashlight, pointed it inside, and his breath caught when he saw the contents, a stack of micro-drives, each stamped with dates spanning 15 years, including operations he'd served on. The implication hit him like a blade. Someone had been cataloging his missions, his failures, his survivors. "They built it all on ghosts," he whispered. Private growled suddenly. Everett turned to see the boy awake, groggy but alive. The child blinked at the light and whispered weakly. Mom Everett set down the pouch, kneeling beside him. "She's safe, kid. You both are." The boy reached out fingers, brushing Private's fur. "Dog. Brought you." Everett nodded. "She did." The boy's eyes closed again, drifting back into a restless sleep. Everett's throat tightened. He rose and zipped the pouch shut, then heard the faint crunch of gravel on the far side of the clearing. Flashlights cut through the fog again. He grabbed the pouch, slung it over his shoulder, and whispered, "Private guard." She limped forward, placing herself between Everett and the approaching beams. A figure stepped into view, smaller than the others, but armed. The voice that followed was female, sharp with authority. "Dr. Lang," she called, "drop the weapon in the bag. You've gone far enough." Everett recognized the tone command, but not cruelty. He stayed still. "You're late," he called back. "They already tried to kill me." The woman stepped closer, revealing a badge on her chest. "DOJ Department of Justice Counter Operations. We're not them," she said. "We're here to contain what they started." Her flashlight found the boy, then the medic bag, then the dog. "So it's true," she whispered. "The courier made it." Everett frowned. "Courier." The woman lowered her weapon slightly. That dog was part of a field test. Bioconditioned tracking protocol meant to deliver physical evidence when transmissions failed. The program was shut down years ago. She looked at Private with a strange mix of awe and guilt. She wasn't supposed to survive. Everett's hands tightened on his cane. "She did," he said quietly, "and she saved lives." The agent nodded slowly, but her expression darkened. "That means they'll come for her." She stepped forward. "Give me the drives, Doctor. They contain names, soldiers, operatives, civilians, people the Night Glass program erased from records. If those fall into the wrong hands, the government collapses under its own sins." Everett's jaw clenched. "I'm not handing them to another faceless suit who'll bury them again." "You don't understand," she said, voice rising. "Those men behind you aren't just cleaning up a file. They're erasing proof of a global ops network. If you keep running, you'll die for nothing." Private barked sharply, the sound slicing through their standoff. Everett looked down at her, then back at the agent. "You want these files safe?" he asked. "Help me get them out?" The woman hesitated, glancing into the fog. "We have one extraction chopper inbound, but the window's small. 10 minutes, maybe less." "Then," Led Everett said. She nodded once, signaling toward a narrow path that cut through the trees. He followed Private, trotting behind the boy, still bundled against his chest. The forest thinned, and through the mist he saw faint blinking lights in the distance, the helicopter. Relief began to bloom in his chest, but then came the sound of engines, again closer than before. The enemy convoy had found them. "Run!" the agent shouted. Everett pushed forward, lungs burning, legs screaming, but the sound of boots and rifles grew louder. Bullets tore through branches, sparks flashing off metal. Private barked wildly, darting between Everett and the gunfire, her body weaving through mud and rain like a phantom. The helicopter lowered blades, roaring wind thrashing the trees. The agent shouted into her radio, "Extraction live, 2 hostiles incoming." Everett reached the clearing as the chopper's side door slid open. A soldier inside waved them forward. "Move!" he yelled. Everett handed the boy up first, then the medic bag. The agent turned to cover them, firing bursts into the forest. Private barked, spinning, and Everett saw the movement too late, a shadow behind the agent raising a rifle. He shouted down, but the dog was faster. She lunged, teeth sinking into the man's arm as the shot went wide. The soldier stumbled, the rifle clattering into the mud. The agent turned and finished him with a single shot to the leg, then grabbed Private, dragging her toward the helicopter. Everett reached out, hauling them both up as the blades whipped harder, lifting the craft. The forest dropped away beneath them. The helicopter sliced through the fading storm, its blades thundering above a horizon still half swallowed in mist. Everett sat strapped against the cabin wall, his hands trembling from cold and exhaustion. Across from him, the DOJ agent, her badge now clipped to her vest, spoke into her headset, her voice sharp and steady. Private lay beside Everett's boots. Her fur soaked her breathing, shallow but rhythmic. The boy slept with his head on the medic bag, fingers curled tightly around its strap, as though he somehow understood the weight it carried. The mother stirred faintly beside him, whispering something inaudible over the roar of the rotors. Everett leaned close and caught fragments of a name, someone she begged them to protect. The agent removed her headset, leaning forward. "We're 20 miles from the nearest safe field," she said. "But there's movement on our tail. 1 aircraft, low altitude." Everett's jaw tightened. "They're not giving up." She nodded grimly. "They never do when the truth's this valuable." The pilot's voice broke through over the comms. Missile lock detected infrared brace. The world exploded in light. The chopper lurched violently, spinning sideways as alarms wailed. Everett grabbed the boy and shielded him with his body. The cabin tore apart in a storm of metal and flame. Gravity vanished, then slammed back all at once. They hit the ground in a rolling crash that ripped through the trees and sent sparks hissing into the dawn fog. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Everett opened his eyes to the smell of burning fuel. His ears rang so loud he couldn't hear his own breath. He pushed himself upright, coughing through smoke. The helicopter lay on its side, in a shallow ravine, fire licking at its tail. "Private," he shouted. A soft whine answered from behind the twisted frame. He crawled toward it, pulling debris aside with shaking hands until he found her wedged beneath a piece of broken paneling. Her flank bled from a deep gash, but her eyes met his, still conscious, still unbroken. "You're all right, girl," he whispered, voice breaking. He pulled her free and wrapped his jacket around her. The boy began to cry somewhere behind him. Everett turned, heart pounding, and saw the agent carrying the child through the wreckage, blood running down her temple, but her steps steady. The mother, pale and half-conscious, was being pulled by the pilot whose uniform was torn and burned. "We have to move," the agent says that. "They'll be here in minutes." Everett nodded. "Where's the data?" She held up the medic bag, somehow untouched by fire. "Right here." He exhaled, relief, mixing with dread. "Then we run." The group stumbled away from the wreck, following the edge of the ravine, where smoke blended into morning fog. The agent led them toward an old dirt service road, barely visible under years of fallen leaves. Private walked weakly beside Everett, her body trembling with every step. "Hold on," he whispered to her. "You've made it this far." Behind them, the sound of rotor blades returned, another helicopter, this one slower, deliberate. Everett scanned the sky and saw it emerge through the mist, matte, no markings, moving like a predator. The agent cursed under her breath. "They're sweeping for survivors." She turned toward the tree line. "We need cover." They pushed deeper into the woods, branches clawing at their clothes, the air thick with the smell of smoke and rain. Private stumbled once, falling to her side. Everett knelt, scooping her up despite the strain on his back. "I've got you, soldier." She rested her head against his chest, eyes half closed. They found a narrow rock shelf beneath a cluster of pines and huddled there, hidden from the air. The agent checked her watch. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they drop ground teams." Everett looked out through the trees at the dark helicopter circling above. "Then we make them regret it." He opened the medic bag and began sorting through the contents, finding syringes, fluid vials, medical tubing tools of healing, not war, but necessity made soldiers out of everyone. "You ever rig a trap?" he asked. The agent frowned. "Not since Quantico." "Good," he said, pulling out a small oxygen canister. "We're going to remind them what happens when they underestimate old medics." They worked quickly, setting the canister beside a fuel line leaking from the wreck, then tying a length of torn wire to the battery pack from the helicopter's comms unit. The agent's hands were steady, her eyes fierce. When she finished, Everett handed her the pistol. "If they spot us first, shoot that line." She nodded once. "What about you?" Everett glanced down at Private, her chest still rising but slower now. "I'll carry her," he said. "She's earned that." The boy stirred again, whispering something about his mother. Everett knelt beside him. "You're going to be all right, son. Your mom's right behind us." The mother's hand reached out weakly, brushing her child's hair. "Please," she whispered, "don't let them take him." Everett clasped her shoulder. "They won't." The helicopter descended, lower its searchlights, cutting through the smoke like blades. Everett crouched, cradling Private while the agent aimed the pistol. The roar of engines filled the ravine. Then came the crunch of boots the soldiers had landed. Everett could see their silhouettes through the fog rifles' raised helmets, glinting with infrared scopes. One of them called out, "We have visuals. Retrieve the package." Everett waited, breath held. They came closer, 2 of them stepping near the broken fuel line. He gave the signal. The agent fired. The bullet struck the wire sparks, jumping to the leaking fuel. The explosion tore through the ravine in a wave of fire and light. The shockwave sent Everett tumbling backward, shielding the boy again with his body. The forest roared alive with heat and smoke. The helicopter above jolted, spun sideways, and veered off as flames engulfed the crash site. When the world settled, silence returned, punctured only by the crackle of burning debris. Everett coughed, ears ringing. "Everyone okay?" he shouted hoarsely. The agent emerged through the smoke, dragging the mother. The DOJ agent followed close, half carrying the mother, while the boy walked beside her, silent and pale. The road wound upward into mist, each bend steeper than the last. Above them dawn crept like spilled gold over the ridge, but the air carried no warmth, only the metallic tang of burned earth and fear. Everett's legs trembled with every step, his vision blurring at the edges. He had been through ambushes, bombings, and fields soaked with blood, yet nothing had ever felt like this one final climb, with everything good in the world clinging to his chest. When they reached the top of the ridge, the ground leveled into a barren plateau of rock and ash. In the center stood a half-buried facility, concrete walls fractured by time, its entrance marked by a single cracked emblem that still gleamed faintly under the sunrise. "There," the agent said hoarsely. "That's the real night glass." Everett frowned. "What is it, a research site?" she said. "They built it to hide memory. Every operation, every lie erased here. Data-scrubbed soldiers buried without graves. Your mission's mine, this is where they ended." Her voice shook. "The drives you have, they're the mirror they never wanted built." Everett stared at the ruined structure, realization spreading like frost through his chest. "So this is where we end it," he said quietly. The agent nodded. "If we can transmit the files, they'll go public. The world will see everything." She pointed toward a rusted satellite dish half-collapsed near the edge of the plateau. "That's our transmitter. It still ties into the old emergency network, but once we power it, they'll find us within minutes." Everett looked down at Private. Her breathing was slower now, each exhale a soft rasp. He crouched and laid her gently on the ground. "Then we don't waste a second." He turned to the boy. "Stay with your mom. Don't move from her side." The boy nodded solemnly. Everett and the agent made their way to the dish, prying open a maintenance panel. Inside, wires were tangled like veins beneath cracked glass. The agent pulled a portable generator from her pack, connecting it with practiced speed. Sparks jumped as the unit hummed to life. "We've got power," she said. "Plug in the drive." Everett opened the medic bag and removed the pouch of microdrives, his hands trembling as he slotted one into the transmitter port. The old machine blinked weakly, screens flickering to life. Lines of encrypted data scrolled across the display. "It's working," she whispered. Then a sound echoed through the valley rotors. Not one, but two aircraft approaching fast from the south. Everett's gut turned cold. "They're early." The agent's jaw tightened. "We need at least 4 minutes for a full transfer." Everett scanned the edge of the plateau. "We'll buy that time." He grabbed his pistol and moved toward the rocks, taking cover behind a concrete barrier. The first helicopter appeared over the tree line, dark and angular. Soldiers rappelled down like shadows. Gunfire erupted instantly, bullets sparking against the stone. Everett returned fire every shot, precise, deliberate. The agent crouched beside the transmitter, shouting updates. 2 minutes Private stirred behind him, lifting her head weakly. She let out a low growl, eyes fixed on the approaching soldiers. Everett turned. "No," he said firmly. "You stay down. You've done enough." But Private pushed herself up, trembling, and staggered toward the sound of gunfire. She moved like a ghost through smoke, body broken, but spirit unyielding. Everett's throat tightened as he watched her disappear into the haze. A soldier shouted, then screamed a sound cut short. The gunfire faltered for a moment. "That's my girl." Everett whispered, tears burning his eyes. The agent's voice broke through the chaos. "Transfer complete." Everett turned, firing a last burst to cover her. She yanked the drive from the port and stuffed it into a waterproof case. "We've got to destroy the transmitter before they can reverse it." Everett nodded. "Do it." She grabbed a flare from her belt, lit it, and jammed it into the generator's fuel line. Fire roared up, instantly consuming the console in a bright flash. "Go!" she shouted. They ran toward the far side of the plateau, where the slope descended into a canyon, but before they reached the edge, a burst of bullets tore through the air. One struck Everett's shoulder, spinning him around. He fell hard, gasping. The agent turned, firing back wildly. "Get the boy," Everett yelled. "Get them out!" She hesitated, torn between orders and instinct. Then Private appeared again, limping, bleeding from her side. She stood between Everett and the advancing soldiers, snarling despite her collapsing legs. The enemy commander raised his rifle, lining up a shot. Everett tried to stand his hand slick with his own blood, but before he could reach the trigger, Private lunged. The bullet caught her mid-air, but her momentum carried through. She hit the man full force, knocking him backward over the edge of the ridge. The echo of the fall vanished into silence. Everett crawled toward her, dragging himself through the dust. She lay motionless, her golden fur darkened by blood. He gathered her into his arms, cradling her head against his chest. "You did it," he whispered, voice breaking. "You saved them all." Her eyes fluttered open, once faint and unfocused. Her tail gave a single twitch. Then she exhaled softly and went still. Everett bowed his head, unable to breathe. The agent knelt beside him, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. "We have to go," she said gently. Everett nodded numbly, lifting Private's small body into his arms. By the time Everett reached the base of the mountain, the world had gone quiet. Smoke curled into the sky from the shattered ridge above, glowing red beneath the early sun like the last breath of a dying storm. He walked with a limp, his arm bound in torn cloth, Private's still body wrapped gently in his jacket against his chest. The medic bag hung from his shoulder, its contents intact, the proof of everything they had survived. The DOJ agent and the small family followed a few steps behind, silent, except for the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. The boy clutched his mother's hand, glancing often at the bundle Everett carried, as if he already understood the kind of hero the world rarely noticed. When they reached the valley floor, a faint hum grew in the distance. The agent raised her head, scanning the horizon. "Rescue chopper," she said quietly. Friendly this time. Everett nodded, but didn't answer. His gaze stayed on the horizon, where sunlight touched the treetops and turned the mist gold. For a moment, it looked as if the world was healing itself. The helicopter descended its downdraft, stirring the ashes around them. Paramedics jumped out, rushing to the mother and child. The agent flashed her credentials, ordering them to transport the civilians first. Everett stood back, watching as the boy was lifted onto a stretcher. The child turned to him, eyes wide. "She saved me," he said, voice trembling. Everett managed a faint smile. "Yeah, kid, she saved all of us." The boy reached a small hand toward the bundle in Everett's arms. "Can I say goodbye?" Everett crouched, lowering Private slightly. The boy brushed her ear gently and whispered, "Thank you." Then he turned away, guided toward the waiting medics. Everett rose slowly, the weight in his arms heavier than it should have been. The agent approached her face, pale but composed. "The transmission went through," she said. "Every file, every image Global Archives lit up an hour ago. It's already trending on every major outlet. They can't bury it this time." Everett exhaled, long and quiet. "Then she did it," he murmured. "The little soldier won the war." The agent looked at him with softened eyes. "There'll be hearings, investigations, maybe even justice. But there's one thing they can't classify." "What's that?" he asked. "What kind of heart it takes to carry truth through fire?" Everett didn't reply. He simply looked down at Private's face, peaceful now, the fur around her muzzle still flecked with mud and soot. The world could debate the rest. This moment belonged to silence. The agent placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll take care of her properly." But Everett shook his head. "No, I will." She hesitated, then nodded, stepping back. The helicopter lifted the survivors away, blades scattering the mist into spirals of gold and gray. When it disappeared over the tree line, Everett turned toward the riverbank. The water there ran shallow and clear, reflecting the soft light of morning. He knelt, setting Private down on a patch of grass. His hands trembled as he unwrapped her from the jacket, smoothing her fur. "You brought hope back, girl," he whispered. "You brought it where no man could." He reached into the medic bag and pulled out the small silver tag she had worn earlier, the one he'd found tangled in her bandage. The engraving caught the sunlight. Service Canine Prototype 017, Hope. He smiled faintly through the ache in his chest. "They gave you a number," he said softly, "but you earned a name." He dug a small grave near the water's edge with his bare hands, the soil cool and damp. When he finished, he laid her down gently, wrapped in his old army scarf. For a long moment he just sat there, head bowed, the wind moving quietly through the trees. Then he whispered, "You're home, soldier." Mission complete. The sun broke fully through the clouds, scattering light across the valley. Birds began to stir in the branches overhead, their songs trembling through the air like fragments of memory returning to life. Everett looked up, blinking against the brightness. Somewhere far above he could still hear faint echoes of distant rotors, an entire world waking up to truth because one dying dog refused to stop. He gathered the medic bag and slung it across his shoulder again, though it felt different now, not as a burden, but as a promise. As he stood, he saw something glinting beneath a nearby rock, a shard of glass, maybe from the explosion above. He picked it up and turned it in his hand, the surface catching the morning light. It shimmered with faint colors, blue, green, gold, like something alive. He remembered the name Night Glass and realized for the first time what it really meant, the reflection of darkness broken by light. He placed the shard atop Private's resting place. "You showed them that light still wins," he whispered. Then he straightened his back and started down the trail toward the distant sound of engines. The agent waited near a truck that had just arrived, its engine idling. When Everett approached, she saluted him, not as an officer, but as one human saluting another who had carried more than duty could ask. "Where will you go now?" she asked. He paused. "There's a vet clinic in Everton, a small place by the hospital." His voice softened. "They've got a wall there, one for animals who served. I think her name belongs on it." The agent smiled faintly. "I'll make sure they know her story." Everett gave a small nod, then looked once more towards the forest. The smoke had thinned into ribbons, the air almost clean again. "You think they'll understand?" he asked quietly. "The people, I mean." She followed his gaze. "Maybe not today," she said, "but they will. Stories like this, they don't fade. They remind us what we almost forgot." Everett smiled faintly. "What's that?" She met his eyes. "That loyalty doesn't need orders. It just needs a reason." He looked away towards the rising sun, where the first true warmth of morning touched his face. In that light, the fatigue in his bones seemed to ease for the first time in days. He placed a hand over the medic bag, feeling the weight of truth resting there like a pulse. "Then let's make sure they never forget her reason," he said quietly. They climbed into the truck together, the road stretching long and silver ahead. As it rumbled away through the valley, the camera of the world might have followed them, two survivors and one unspoken vow. Back by the river, a single gust of wind lifted the scarf on Private's grave, letting a streak of light fall across it. It shimmered once almost like breath, and for anyone watching closely, it might have looked like her tail moved again just once to say goodbye. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the quiet heroes among us. Tell us what moment hit you the hardest, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel.